Hey guys, Caleb here with DSLR Video Shooter, and we're finally doing it. The anamorphic video is here. Now that we've had our J.J. Abrams moment, let me calm down this light back here. So here's the deal. I've been working on this video, or wanting to do this video, for I think over an entire year. It got to the point where I just said, you know what, let's just make an anamorphic video. I had all these plans to shoot all these setups and do all this crazy stuff, but getting something out to you guys is more important to me than just making it absolutely perfect. So maybe we'll see more stuff in the future. Let me know if you are interested in anamorphic and would like to see a series or a full guide. At any rate, this video is just gonna be getting you started. All the stuff I've tried, all 6 of these anamorphic lenses, all the things you need to think about when purchasing and buying and all that. Keep in mind, everything will be linked to down in the description as we go through this video. And let's jump straight in by talking about how anamorphic works in a very basic way. And essentially, all anamorphic is doing is taking your image and your light, your information in your scene, and squeezing it down onto the sensor. Now that amount of squeeze will depend on the type of lens you're using. So anamorphic lenses come in different strengths or amounts of squeezing that they do to your image. The most popular two are going to be 2x anamorphic, which means it's taking the image or your scene and squeezing it by 2 times onto your sensor. And 1.33 is also another popular one, taking your image and squeezing it by 1.33 times onto your sensor. Now 2x is more traditional when it comes to true anamorphic, as some people call it. You can explore the history of anamorphic on YouTube or on the internet, very interesting stuff, but true anamorphic is usually that 2x squeeze. The problem with a 2x squeeze, however, is most of our cameras shoot in 16:9, and that translates to a ridiculously thin and silly looking anamorphic frame or aspect ratio. So to really take advantage of 2x lenses, you need to have a camera that can shoot in a 4:3 or a square kind of aspect ratio. And then when you de-squeeze your image, you're going to get a true anamorphic aspect ratio. 1.33 anamorphic lenses originally came out when people didn't want to upgrade to 16:9 cameras and wanted to get that same image using 4:3 frame. So when you use 1.33 on 4:3, you're going to get a 16:9 image. It's a perfect conversion. But what's great is if you take a 1.33 anamorphic lens and you put it on a 16:9 camera, which is what most of us are using, you'll get very close, if not right at, a CinemaScope or cinema kind of aspect ratio. Now I'm going to run through what happens when you use an anamorphic lens. There are several different artifacts and side effects of using them. So the first one is one that we all think of, and that is flaring. As you saw at the beginning of this video, when you have a light source in your shot hitting the lens, you're gonna usually get flaring with anamorphic lenses. And it's usually a streak across the image, but there's all kinds of different light artifacts that'll show up depending on the lens combinations that you're using. Another one that a lot of people don't always think about is the field of view is going to change dramatically. Here's what a 50mm spherical or normal lens looks like on my GH5. When you use a 2x lens, you can see that we're gaining a ton of width. So the way it kind of works is you take that focal length, divide it by 2 if you're using a 2x lens, and that's what your horizontal field of view will be. So if you use a 50mm, you're actually going to have the width of a 25mm by using anamorphic. Another big effect or artifact you'll see is the change in bokeh, or the out of focus areas in your scene. Traditionally with a spherical lens, you'll see round bokeh and everything will be kind of in its same shape, just blurred out. Whereas when you use anamorphic lenses, you get that distinctive oval or different shapes, and it kind of takes the entire out of focus area and stretches it vertically. I think this is the #1 reason we think anamorphic lenses look cinematic. Not the flares, but actually the distortion. And if you just start using anamorphic lenses, you'll immediately feel like you're shooting a movie because that out of focus area is so distinctive compared to using traditional normal spherical lenses. Last but not least, you're going to notice that there are distortion artifacts when using anamorphic lenses. Again, this is something that just kind of adds a little sprinkle of magic on top of your image. Now in this video, we're mainly going to be focusing on anamorphic adapters and projection lenses. You can go out and buy or rent true, real anamorphic lenses, but they're wildly expensive and often rare depending on the flavor of anamorphic you're going after. So I'm mainly going to be focusing on adapters. They're way more affordable and you can get up and running, without spending too much money. So now let's talk about what you actually need to get anamorphic working on your camera. Well, the first thing you'll need is what's called a taking lens. This is just a normal lens. You probably already have a couple lying around. And what we're going to be doing is attaching an anamorphic lens to the front of that taking lens, if you will. Now, you don't want to just use any lens on the planet. There are specific lenses and focal lengths you'll want to pay attention to. So we've got our taking lens, it's attached to the camera. The next thing we need to do is mount our anamorphic adapter. Some of the adapters I'm going to be talking about just thread right on and you're done. Others are going to require some clamps. The ones I've been using and finding work the best are from Vid Atlantic. I'll be linking to a few down below, and we'll talk about full setups here in a little bit. But the idea is they're going to clamp onto your anamorphic adapter, and then you'll be able to thread it onto your lens. Once you have your anamorphic adapter attached to your taking lens, you need to align it. So if I hold, I believe it's this direction, yes, this lens up, we'll use my huge white forehead as a kind of backdrop. You can see that there's an oval. We want that to be from the front up and down. If it's tilted off a little bit like this, you're going to get some crazy weird stuff going on. Next, you might need what's called a filter clamp. Some of these anamorphic adapters have no way to put filters on the front, so you'll need to add another clamp so that you have a 77mm or whatever filter size. Some of these anamorphic adapters you can super glue or epoxy on a step-up ring and that'll work just fine. Speaking of step-up rings, you'll probably want a couple different sizes to make everything match up. For instance, this rear clamp has a 60mm thread. My lens has a 52mm thread, so you need step-up rings to make all of that work. And the next thing you might need is called a variable diopter. So the problem with a lot of these lenses is they are dual focus systems. This means you would have to set your taking lens to the correct distance and your anamorphic to the correct distance, making focus pulls almost impossible, and it's a lot of fiddling to get both set up just right. So unless you're doing something like this where you're not moving, it can be a real pain. But you can purchase what are called variable diopters. The way these work is you set your taking lens to infinity as well as your anamorphic lens to infinity. And now this adapter that you put on the front of your lens, that handles all focus going forward. And it turns the whole system into kind of one single lens. There are 3 of these that I know of and that are fairly popular and readily available. The one I own is the SLR Magic Rangefinder adapter. So you would attach this to the front of your whole setup and that becomes your new focus ring. It works really well. There are a couple problems. I noticed that there's some serious blobbing blue action going on that you wouldn't get if you just had an anamorphic lens. And then it's fairly soft compared to the competition, but it is the most affordable. There's 2 other options. I'll have those linked to below as well. One is from the company Rapido. They're a little harder to get a hold of, but they're superior in quality to the SLR Magic. And then there's another company, the Anamorphic store on eBay, where you can find these nice little ones that'll work great with these anamorphic adapters. But both those options are between $600 and $800, so it's pretty expensive. And we'll also talk about some other adapters that are easier to focus. And the next thing you might need are diopters for the very front of your entire setup. So the problem, again, with these anamorphic lenses is your minimum focus distance is usually pretty far away. So this is where you would add a diopter and you would thread it onto the front and it would let you get much closer to your subject. Another thing you might need is some kind of monitor solution to de-squeeze your image, or else you'll be looking at this very strange squeezy image on the back of your camera. Now the GH5 and GH5S from Panasonic have a de-squeezing mode built in, but for most cameras you'll need to get a monitor that can de-squeeze that. Luckily there are lots of affordable options. I'll link to a few below, including a 5-inch that's pretty affordable and it works really well. And the next thing you might need is some kind of lens support. I would recommend a very simple 15mm base plate for your camera and add a lens support to it, because some of these setups can get pretty front heavy, others you will have no problems at all. But that might be something you want to consider to not put so much stress on your lenses and on your camera. Okay, now let's talk about the actual anamorphic adapters that you can pick up and use with your camera system. So I have a total of 6 that I'll be talking about, all with various features. So let's start with the best kind of all-in-one, most compact of the bunch, and this is the SLR Magic Anamorphot-50 adapter. And this is the most compact. It actually has compact in the name. You can buy all these SLR Magic anamorphic adapters readily on eBay. This wasn't sponsored. I purchased all of this stuff. And what's cool about this one is the size. It is minuscule compared to all the other options we'll be talking about. It is a 1.33 anamorphic, so it'll work great with cameras that shoot 16:9 or 4K UHD. And you just thread it onto the front of your camera, and it has filter threads and rear threads. It's got an awesome rear locking ring, which allows you to very easily attach it, align it, and lock it in place. This is by far the easiest, smallest, lightweight setup, and it does work really, really well. A couple things to keep in mind: it is a square anamorphic, so you're not going to get that oval bokeh, but it'll give you the anamorphic distortion, and it definitely will give you flares. And all of these SLR Magics give you pretty significant blue flares. So if you don't like colored or blue flares, you might want to avoid the SLR Magic stuff, but they do flare really well. This adapter and all the other SLR Magic adapters we'll be talking about don't work very well wide open. So if all you want to do is shoot anamorphic at 1.8, you might want to skip all these. They do work great at around maybe 2.8 to f4 and beyond, but you'll definitely want to keep that in mind. Now, the way these adapters work from SLR Magic, and this one and the rest are all the same in this regard, is there's a ring on it that's kind of like a focus ring, and it says near, and then if you spin it, it goes over to normal. The way this works is when you have this mounted to your camera lens or your taking lens, you'll use your taking lens for off focus. But as you move closer or further away from your subject, you will want to pay attention to this ring and get it close. So if you're really close to something, set it to near. If you're shooting a little further out, you can set it to kind of in between or normal. And SLR Magic has kind of a sheet for how to figure all that stuff out. So it's not a true single focus system, but it's not as difficult as some of the other lenses where you really have to make sure both your taking lens and adapter are set correctly. You can of course use a single focus or variable diopter on the front of these adapters to completely eliminate all that hairy stuff. Our next anamorphic adapter is also from SLR Magic, and this one is also a 1.33 times, just like the previous one. And this is the SLR Magic Anamorphot-50. So unlike the previous one, we are now doing a round anamorphic. Let me hold it the correct way. And you can see it's slightly oval. It's not as oval as a 2X, but it will give you a more round bokeh or oval bokeh. So that's really nice. It's a little larger, still very compact, and you really don't need lens support for this and the previous option. So it's going to work great for 16:9 cameras. There are some downsides, just like the previous one. It's a little soft if you're going to be shooting wide open, or a lot soft. So you'll want to stop your lens down to 2.8 to around f5.6, somewhere in there for your minimum aperture. And it also has those blue flares that are very strong, but it's a great little adapter, and it's going to work with pretty much any camera. Our next lens is our last SLR Magic adapter, and this guy is a true 2X anamorphic adapter from SLR Magic. It's the SLR Magic Anamorphot-50 2X. So you can see here, if I hold it up on my forehead, it's a true 2X, lots of oval action there. And this one's pretty awesome. It's going to give you really nice flares. It's that full real anamorphic. It is huge, as you can see, at least compared to the last two. So with this guy, you'll probably want lens support. This was actually my first or second adapter that I purchased. The flares are very true to form. They're going to give you a lot more flares, a lot more cinematic flares compared to the previous two, because it's really anamorphic. The bokeh is going to be more anamorphic, but it also suffers from lots of blue in those flares, and it is still soft at wide open on most lenses, so you'll want to stop things down again. But I actually shot an entire review using this guy, so you can check that out somewhere on the screen or in the description. I reviewed a light and shot with this. If you want to see what the kind of characteristics are going to look like, you can check that out. This one is fairly expensive compared to the previous two, but it is a really nice all-in-one. Again, you thread it onto your lens, you align it very easily with this ring, and you've got a filter ring on the front. No other stuff needed, no fuss, and it's really solid. All these are really solid once you attach them to your taking lens. Our next three anamorphic options are all projection lenses. So these were originally designed to be used on projections to take that anamorphic image and de-squeeze it onto a screen. So the first one we're going to talk about is the one I'm using right now to film this video, and it is a 16mm anamorphic adapter. Now, there are a gazillion different brands that sell this exact lens. A lot of popular ones include Kowa, Sankor, Elmo, and a lot of others. So you can find these on Amazon for around $300. They're true 2x anamorphic, and they're not too expensive. There are some downsides and some serious upsides with these. The downsides are it is a dual focus setup, so you will need to go ahead and get some kind of solution for that, or have to focus both your taking lens and the adapter. The rear element of the lens is fairly small, so you won't want to use large lenses, but distortion is pretty strong on this adapter compared to some of the next ones we're going to talk about. So if you're going to move the camera a ton and be close to a subject, you might notice some crazy stuff there. What I love about this lens is the flaring. As you saw at the beginning of the video, and even right now, the flares are pretty great. And what's cool is they kind of take on the color of the light source. So those SLR Magics are very blue. This one, if it's a warm light, it's going to look kind of warm turquoisey, and if it's really cool, it's going to look blue. So I love the look of the flares, the shape of the flares. It's really, really nice. And sharpness isn't too bad. It's a little better than the SLR Magic ones, so you can shoot closer to wide open, but I wouldn't recommend shooting at like 1.2 or 1.4. And it's a fairly small adapter, so it's not gonna be super heavy. Some of the next ones we're gonna talk about are a little heavier, but it's a great lens to get started with, and it's true 2x, so not too bad. Our last two lenses are also projection lenses. Unlike the previous one, which was from Japan originally, these are German lenses, and these are the ISCO Ultrastars. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. There are several versions of these lenses. There's the original, there's kind of the Mark II, which is this one right here. It's kind of a deeper, more bronze looking, darker gold. And then we have the red version, which is the newest of the bunch. Very similar, although I have noticed the red version is sharper and maybe a touch less distortion, but any of these will do a great job. And of course, the red one's usually going to be a little more expensive. If you buy one of these, you will often see them with a bunch of stuff on the back. You can remove both the lens or original taking lens for the projector, as well as some other rings to get down to something like this. Now this red one here, I've got the clamps all set up with it. They work great from Vid-Atlantic. And the story with these is they are true 2x anamorphic lenses. So you can see there's that nice oval. They are dual focus, so you'll need to use, two things focusing at once or get a variable diopter for the front. But these lenses are sharp, man. You can shoot pretty much wide open with them depending on your focus setup. And that's amazing. The only thing I don't like about these lenses is the lack of flaring. So the lens we're using right now has got great flares. You can see them right here. I apologize for how intense they are. It's an anamorphic video, so I thought I'd go a little crazy. I normally wouldn't do something like this, but these guys don't have that as extreme. They're a little more subtle. So if you love flares up in your face and crazy flares, these might not do that for you, although you can modify them slightly to get that, but we'll maybe cover that in a future video. But just like the last one we talked about, they're a little more finicky, a lot more finicky than using those SLR Magics. And that brings us to final recommendations. Where should you start and what should you consider for anamorphic? The first lens I personally purchased was this little compact 40 from SLR Magic. It's not true 2x anamorphic, but it was amazing to use and it really helped me get started. You can focus more on focusing, and it's very easy to use and attach to your lens. You can actually use this with the GH5 and the 12-35 for a really nice compact setup. For those who might go for the setup, you'll probably want to turn on X-Tele to take full advantage of that. it's a great little runaround setup. Now, it won't give you as sharp or as many flares or as much stretch, but it will give you that kind of distortion a little bit and some of that magic stretched out of focus areas that make anamorphic so cinematic. So a great one to start with, not too expensive, very easy to use. That goes for all the SLRs. They do have that annoying to me blue flare, but they're so easy to use, and that's where all the SLR Magics kind of have that strength. Otherwise, either the ISCOs or the kind of Sankor style anamorphic projection lenses are wonderful. For the best flares for the least amount of money, you'll probably want to pick up a Sankor 16 or one of those lenses. Again, links in the description. And then if you just want the best image quality possible and flares are less of a concern, then definitely check out the ISCO lenses. You can pick up the clamps and the adapter for, I would say, under $600 to $800, and you'll be up and running. With all of these, you'll probably want to consider picking up a variable diopter. The SLR Magic one adds that blue blobby action, and it's a little soft, but it is really affordable compared to the other options and competition. Otherwise, for, again, best image quality, you'll want to spend a little more, probably $500 to $800, and get a better single focus setup. And that's going to wrap up this video on anamorphic. I know I didn't go into a lot of detail. Let me know if you'd like to see more videos, maybe a series or a whole guide on these, and we can get that taken care of in the future. I also skipped over de-squeezing all your footage, and it's fairly simple. You can find tutorials online, but essentially you're just gonna plop the footage in, and if you're using a 2x, squeeze the top and bottom or stretch it out by 2 times. Same with 1.33. So that's gonna do it for me. Everything's down in the description if you're looking for stuff we talked about. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.